My name is Mike Linderman. I am the site director for those of you who do not know me. And the reason we're doing this lecture series, November of 1938 is the year Eli Lilly bought this property in the name of the Indiana Historical Society. So we're celebrating 75 years of being established out here. So we thought we'd bring in the experts from IU to talk a little bit more about the Mississippian culture. The lecture that was scheduled for 2 weeks ago with Dr. Jeremy Wilson, we have rescheduled for March 15th, the Ides, so beware of that day. So he'll be back for that. And then if I get ambitious, I may throw in the history, the modern history of Angel Mounds lecture sometime between now and then as well, and talk about the WPA and things like that that occurred out here. Some of you have been bored to death with that talk over the years. A lot of you I haven't seen at that talk, so we'll do that. I'll turn it over to April.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes?
On the March 15th reschedule, what time?
Same 1 o'clock. Yep.
Thank you.
There are still some seats up here if anybody wants to come up and take a seat. Well, thank you all for coming. This is the first time I've ever been down here to give a talk, and I'm quite delighted. Actually came to, I live in Bloomington, but we came to Evansville early yesterday because I brought my sisters down for a weekend getaway to Evansville because we were tired of looking at Bloomington's snow and we thought we'd just go to Evansville and look at somebody else's snow. But it's been real nice. Okay, Mississippian Cosmology. Cosmology, what does that evoke when you hear about cosmology? What do you think about?
Origins.
Origins is good, yeah. What else?
How everything blends.
How everything blends. That's good because we're going to talk about that. Yeah, it's the way people view the world. It's kind of a worldview. It's how things are kind of set up when you think about what you do every day and who you contact and what frames what we do. And what frames what we do is well, certainly the earth that we're standing on, but also beliefs about other kinds of things that affect the earth, as well as views about where we came from, perhaps where we may be going. You hear about cosmology sometimes in the context of astronomy and physics, sometimes too with the expanding universe and black holes and all that good kind of stuff. But I'm going to talk about people's views from the past, as much as we can figure that out. And you'll see it's not any kind of an exact science, that's for sure. Forward.
Nice ringtone.
It does have a nice ringtone.
What's going on?
Why aren't you working?
Is there a battery in it?
Yes,
There we go.
There is. I used the computer. Mississippian World. Wow, see, it's a big one. And it's interesting, but when we say Mississippian, archaeologists really are talking about a sort of set of ideologies, cosmology, beliefs that unify people all over the eastern part of the continent. Now we're sitting over here at Angel Mounds. Some of the other large Mississippian centers, of course, are Cahokia. Who's been there? It's fantastic, right? It's totally fantastic. But Mississippian manifestations go much farther than that. So a couple other places that I may talk about today, I'll certainly mention Cahokia. I'm also going to mention the site of Spyro over here on the Arkansas River. It's about the farthest west incident or example of Mississippian culture and Mississippian cosmology that we have. But there are other big sites too, Moundville in Alabama, Etowah in Georgia, and there's even a site that's in some ways similar to Angel up in Wisconsin, about there, called Astonia. So the Mississippian ideology spread really far and really wide. That's one of the things that makes it so interesting. All of these different groups, they had differences in their ceramics, differences in the way they got food, differences in the way they organized themselves socially and so on, but there are some certain sort of basic principles that seem to link them all together. Didn't beat, but yes. So, the question, we'll go back one. All right, so there's my first question. How would you know? How would we know? Mississippian, about 1000 AD or so, to sort of, or archaeologists, we say ACE, it means after Common Era, just a convention, to 1450 or so. So the question is, how would we know? What's going to tell us about what people think about, or what people thought about, or how they organized the world around them? You already know the first one since you saw the slide. Ask people, yes. Descendants of communities that may have descended from the Mississippian folks that populated the rivers of the East, very well populated, highly populated areas in the East. And of course, many of the descendants of people who may have lived at Angel, certainly ones who lived at Cahokia and thereabouts, eventually also moved to other areas, forcible removal to places like Oklahoma for Indiana's Indians, and then westward movement of people from the Great Lakes into the Great Plains. So some of the accounts that, and the oral traditions, the histories that have been handed down by descendant communities is one of the ways to learn about the worldviews of the past. What else could we look at? Anybody?
How their camp's set up.
Yeah, sites. And that one's definitely in here. Sites. You could look at how things are set up. What does a home look like? Our house look like? What else?
Pottery.
Pottery, good. Material culture, absolutely. And rock art. You'd be surprised to know that we have rock art all over the Midwest. Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin, Missouri. This is a set of petroglyphs that have been outlined in chalk on a rock at a state park in Missouri. But there are other very, archaeologists are finding more and more of these rock art sites. It's very important to find them and document them. One problem, though, with rock art is that sometimes people come with chisels and try to remove it from the rock.
That's bad.
What do you think? Is that bad? Yeah, that's pretty bad. Thanks, Mike. I should have said, and that's really bad. Material culture, pottery, and so on. Pottery sometimes carries designs, but we also have a lot of other things from Mississippian culture that gives a lot of clues. This is a stone pipe found at the Spyro Site in Oklahoma. We're getting back to this in a bit too, but these materials were all found at the Spyro Site in Oklahoma. The site was looted during the 1930s, and all of this came out of this, and much, much more, came out of looting of the mound, and then, just like at Angel, WPA crews went in and excavated the rest of that mound. One of the things these are all stone artifacts, stone mesas. They're about this big. These, however, are shells. They come from a whelk shell that's found in the Gulf of Mexico, would have to have been traded probably up the Mississippi and then up the Arkansas River. The thing about these shells is that they have been engraved with hundreds of images. And so it's almost like finding a whole catalog of Mississippian images that could tell us something. These actually, here are the centerpieces out of the shell that then were worn by people around their necks as pendants. So material culture. Sites, yes. How you set up your site. Whether it's sites on a huge scale like Cahokia, and I mean huge, really big. Cahokia, amazing. This is representation of Monk's Mound. Some of the features here that are of note. A chunky court for playing the game chunky, which is played with a sort of large circular stone. This feature over here, does that remind you of anything? Set of, pardon?
England.
Yeah, a maypole, sure.
Stonehenge.
Stonehenge, also very good. It is called a henge because it's a circular arrangement of posts with a big center post. What could that mean? We'll sort of look at that.
Didn't they determine the seasons with that in the equinoxes?
They could look, this is one of the henges at Cahokia, and the center post and other posts were delineated to mark those astronomical events, the annual sort of astronomical events. Sunrises at the equinox, winter sunrise, so winter and summer solstice markers.
Things that they probably celebrated, but we don't. We celebrate other holidays like Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's.
We do.
Those were very important
Those,
to their culture.
They were. Also, though, if you think about some of our holidays, when is Christmas? What's it close to? Winter solstice, sure. What about Easter?
Spring solstice.
Yes, and it's even, you know, how is the date for Easter selected?
After the first Sunday, after the first Monday, after the vernal equinox.
Full moon.
Full moon.
First Sunday after the first full moon of the after the vernal equinox. That is an astronomical calculation. So yeah, time is important to people. Everyone knew when the seasons were or when they were going to change. But having things that marked those important days meant that you could celebrate those days in a perhaps a special kind of way. It's always nice also to know after winter that there will be spring. I have had my doubts this year, but so in looking at a lot of those different sources of information, the way sites are arranged, what we find in sites in terms of the way sites are organized, material culture, stories and things like that, it's fairly clear that the universe is conceptualized as having an above world, things that are in the above world, this world, which is sort of like the kind of terrestrial world that people occupy, and a below world, which is that sort of secret, possibly scary place below the surface of the earth. It's not, it's not a real uncommon worldview. We sort of have that when we talk about the heavens, right? That's in the above world. So let's look a little bit at what those look like. Now, I don't know everything about Mississippian cosmology. This is a huge field, and if you put 6 archaeologists together talking about Mississippian archaeology, Mississippian cosmology, you'll get 6 different stories. That's the beauty of being people. But the above world there are symbols that indicate the above world. Angel is a great place for that too, because you know this, the angel symbol is the sun symbol with the 4 patches in the center. Very similar here. So the above world, that has the sun. Sun, very important. Makes everything happen, right? Brings the warmth, grows the plants. A reflection of the sun, though, in the sort of terrestrial world, for people, would be a sacred fire, or the hearth fire. That fire that keeps everything going on this world. So this is a particular sherd with a decoration on it. This comes from a Mississippian site in Missouri, but it's very similar to lots of pottery found at Angel also. It has this ray around the outside. Very likely that does represent the sun, the fire coming from the sun. So the upper world is associated with sun and with fire. But there are a lot of other associations too. Animals, plants, other things get imbued with an association. They link to some of these ideas about what goes on in the above world. One of those symbols is that of the hawk. Hawks are perceived as strong, smart, sacred, and some of that specialness that the hawks have as being probably one of the most special symbols of the above world, you see often in the Mississippian material culture iconography. This is one of those shells that came from Spyro Site. It has heads of hawks. And the whole shell has these hawk heads all around it. And the shells are large. They're about yay big with the sort of tail on the shell. They're curved. They're really hard. Shell is really hard. These were all carved with stone tools. And then in many cases, the designs were rubbed with charcoal so that they stand out. And even now, 600 years after they were put in the ground, the material, the ones like this that are now in museums or back with tribal groups, you can still see sometimes very clearly those decorations. You have to be a really skilled artist to do this. I tried. I gave up. Also in the above world, there's the heavens. I mean, there really is what's up there, right? And imagine that's not 2014. It's a time when there is no light pollution. And you can really see the Milky Way. Who's been in a place where the Milky Way is so clear because there's no light? Where'd you have to go?
I was on the Mohawk Trail in Massachusetts.
Nice. Yeah.
Every star you could imagine that I've never seen anywhere else.
Yeah.
Especially around here.
Yeah, right. It's something that we're missing. So if you ever do get a chance to go someplace where there is no light pollution, it's really something to see. So this would have been something that would have been in the night sky continually. It divides the skies in two, so it creates a sort of kind of this side and that side. It divides into east and west. The below world is thought of as dark. However, when the above world becomes dark and you can see things in it, there is a belief that the below world becomes light. So day and night, I mean, it's a basic thing of life. Of course people are going to pay attention to that. Other things that people would have noticed in the night sky has to do with the rotation of the Earth, which gives us the impression, if you take a time-lapse NASA photo, and you can see the star trails. They're circular. There's an immovable star in the middle, which would be the North Star, the pole star. Currently, that star is Polaris, named after being the pole star. So what people would also see, they would see constellations that they might be used to moving around the sky, sort of around a fixed point like that. Some of those bright stars, here's Polaris. What this is showing is that the actual location of the pole star, or the pole in the sky, changes. It's on like a 26,000 year cycle. So Polaris wasn't always the pole star. It happens to be the pole star now, and it's a bright star. So we see it. During Mississippian times, the pole star would have been located about right here. This process is called precession. The poles move because the Earth is tilted on an axis, and that wobbles a little bit. So at the North Pole, that wobble is going to be represented in that axis by pointing to a different place in the sky. 10,000 years ago, the brightest star near where the pole would have been pointing is a star called Vega, which is much, much brighter even than Polaris. So in 14,000 years, Vega will again be our pole star, but we won't be here. Hopefully our descendants will be, but we won't be here. So for the Mississippians, not too far off, the pole star being at the Polaris being at the pole, so they would have seen that bright star. And these are the constellations they would have seen moving around it. The Little Dipper, or the Small Bear, or whatever you want to call it, would have moved around that fixed point. And that's something that people would see.
So then question.
Yeah.
Do you think not only did they know the winter and summer and spring solstice by that, but do you think they also knew that how the stars were in the sky?
Yeah.
As well?
Oh, they knew how the stars were in the sky, absolutely.
Well, I mean, you know, at different time periods.
I suspect they did. I mean, you can spend a lot of time looking at stars when you're not seduced by television, for example.
There you go.
So yeah, undoubtedly, and the constellations were extremely important, and different groups may have had different names for them, but the bright stars are the bright stars, and those are the ones that get into the constellations. So this group of stars here, which is bright, which is the Little Dipper, would have been a feature. This cluster of bright stars, which seems to form like a snake, we call it Draco, the constellation Draco, which implies dragon or snake. So yeah, people knew constellations, and they may have even recorded constellations on the rock art. They might have recorded it on ceramics. They may even have recorded it as tattoos on their own bodies. And then there's this world, the terrestrial world. So this world would consist of people, the terrestrial environments, what people use every day on an everyday basis, plants, animals. The circle divided by a cross, often with a circle in the center, sometimes called the quartered circle, has many different manifestations. It's found everywhere throughout Mississippian artwork and such. It's found up through all of the historic Native American groups also.
Southwestern as well.
Absolutely. In this case, representing the horizon, if you sort of take a flat view, the cardinal directions, which are easily identifiable. I mean, you don't have to have a compass to know that there are things in the sky that tell you, that give you axes. For example, the Milky Way with the east-west, the sunrise, the sunset, the pole star that doesn't move. So the cardinal directions, and then the kind of quarters where things can happen. Sometimes unseen things can happen, and which you associate with different stuff. So, northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest.
Examples of the unseen things you're talking about?
Unseen things like senses about, say, northwest, or let's say southeast perhaps. The southeast quarter would be perhaps associated with, because of the astronomical, like summer sunrises, summer and a far south sun, or far south and far north sun actually in the summer. So sort of a place where planets or suns and stuff would live, perhaps. So a star like the evening star, the morning star, at different times of the year is going to live in a different quarter. And so there's a sense of a home there for a star that you don't see, but you know it's there. It's kind of weird because we don't really do it. There's not a good analog. I can't really think of a good analog for us. Let's see.
Our weather patterns come differently too.
Yeah, the weather patterns come differently. So for example, yeah, got it. On the plains, these are also associated with winds. The winds, the northeast, west wind. Certain times of year, the winds are coming from this direction. If there's low pressure, perhaps you're going to get winds from this direction. So the unseen things like the actions of winds that may kick up or not, depending on what we would think of as climate variables, but which other people would think of as unseen forces at work.
Yeah, because if your tornado come up to this way,
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to hunt or travel or camp in that direction.
In that direction, yeah.
You'd be afraid of that.
Yeah, exactly. So you sort of like, you give a certain area a kind of special character. We don't have a word for it in English. I worked in South America. In South America, they have a word that means specialness. The word is waka. And if something is waka, it means it's whoa, kind of, you know, but whoa that's a word and a gesture that's trying to, you know, imply something that we don't really have a word for. So places that have waka can be associated with these different directions. And in South America, actually, all the directions were even divided up into more directions, and specific sorts of ceremonial pathways and landmarks were identified along those pathways. And it might be a matter of someone actually making a path or building a cairn of stones or something, or carving into a rock. So who knows? If we knew where all the rock art was in the Midwest and figured out how it was associated and how it may have lined up on cardinal directions, who knows what we might learn? People may have put that rock art in that place for a very specific reason. Because it's waka. But some of the pyramids in Peru are referred to as Waka de la Luna, for example. Special place of the moon, of the Moche people. And it's an actual pyramid. Specialness. The center can represent a council fire, so where a lot of people would come to meet, or it could even represent the fire in a house. Basic organization. We use the same one. I mean, north, south, east, west. We use the same thing, essentially. This world, also associated with animals. In this case, the white-tailed deer, very important animal of the terrestrial world. This kind of space. Also rabbits. Deer, important because of why, do you think?
They're so useful.
It's so useful. Nothing wasted on a deer. There's meat, there's antler, there's hide, there's sinew, there's blood, it's a wonderful package. If you're further west, bison, the mighty buffalo. But also, rabbits. They're ubiquitous. They're quick. They can exemplify speed, perhaps. And also bears. Bears, very special. They're almost like people. Right? Bears are almost like people. They're omnivores, just like we are. They'll eat meat, they'll eat plants. They'll stand up bipedally, like a person. Very special animals of this world. And then there's the below world. Caves, for example, cave openings, those are portals into the below world. And when we think about the Midwest and what sometimes the landscape looks like, you can tell that those portals into the underworld are very important. For example, look at this landscape. Karst topography. In other words, it's limestone caves underneath. And so every single divot here on the giant cosmic golf course is a sinkhole. And a sinkhole has a potential entrance into the underworld. Be very, very careful in cars topography, not just so your car doesn't slip into a sinkhole, but because there could be powerful beings living down there, and certainly are. Midwest, lots of caves. Indiana, lots of caves. Ohio Valley, lots of caves. Missouri, caves. And along the places where we have some of the biggest Mississippian sites, yes, they're located along important waterways, but the presence of caves is always there hand in hand. Animals of the below world. One of the most waka, this guy's waka, the timber rattlesnake. But also the friendly channel catfish. Animals that live below. They'll come up, but they can make an escape down below. They have a connection to the below world. Rattlesnakes, extremely powerful. Probably rattlesnakes as powerful for the underworld, for the below world, as the hawk is for the above world. But let's not forget the catfish. I put that in because I was at the Glenn Black Laboratory with huge collections of materials from all over the Midwest, and we were looking at some things, and there was a pipe that actually looked like it could have been in the shape of a catfish. I hadn't ever seen one before. It's like, wow, it's a fish pipe. That's amazing. So the powerful beings from above and below, they sometimes take on characteristics of other worlds, perhaps. This is a Hawkman motif. This is a set of feathered rattlesnake, cat-headed things that we'll talk about. The Hawkman, powerful spirit, powerful being of the above world. Human arms to a point, not really hands. He does have legs with feet, but sometimes this character is represented actually with talons for hawk feet. Typical hawk tail representation. You know, if you watch a red-tailed hawk in flight, you see that tail. Hawk arms, but look what else he's got. He's got a pendant from the columella of a shell. So that's it's an underworld, below world representation from a sea living shell. White, also important. Colors have meaning. They don't mean the same thing for everybody. Sometimes they're associated with direction, but things in the past in the Mississippian world were very colorful. We don't get much of the color because it's faded away or it's decayed. Very colorful though. And white, important. Beads, either out of white shell or possibly even pearls. Those are representative of something. In some cases, they seem to represent like saliva or body fluids. And in some origin stories, it's spit that perhaps causes the impregnation of a woman, or perhaps the other bodily fluid that actually causes the impregnation of a woman. Excuse me for being indelicate, but and it's, you know, people know what it is and what it does, and it could even be represented by wearing pearls. Underworld, scary underworld critters. The rattlesnake, that important symbol, but these are given wings with the idea that they could perhaps fly. The heads represent the heads of cats. These are water panthers. Feathered serpents with cat heads. Sometimes you see water panthers that have the regular sort of cat-like form, but they also always have wings. And they almost always have rattlesnake parts. And they can live in the water, and they live in the underworld, and if something creepy happens, they can come out. People who die of drowning, sometimes they're thought to have been captured by the water panthers, especially if they're found and they have like a white clay or something in their mouths. It means the water panther got them. So these kinds of things, and notice here, we've got this shape. We've got the quartered circle in the center. We've got 4 of these going different directions. Can't prove it, but what if this could also be a sort of representation of like the area of the sky that doesn't move, and these the constellations that twirl about it during the night. The spiral form, Mississippian, very common. And it could come from a number of things, but it certainly could come from seeing the constellations, which are given animal forms and attributes, circling around at night. So what are you going to do to protect yourself from things like that? Talismans. Don't swim in the Mississippi River where the water panthers are really, really, really common. Maybe.
Probably do prayer.
Yeah. Yeah. You say special things. You have special objects that you devote. The water beings, the powerful water beings, the powerful above world beings, always in tension. Always perhaps fighting. Something's got to keep those tensions sort of at bay. People can do that. They can be mediated by people with the talismans, with saying special things. Or by understanding that there may be connections between the two worlds, the lower and upper, or above and below, and these are often represented by a tree. The tree being very much of this world. But trees connect the below with the above, right? I mean, they go from, the roots are in the ground, the crown of them has the hawk's nest. They go from below to above. This is on one of the shells from Spyro. One side, these colors have been applied by an artist. They don't exist on the real one. One side has the birds and is associated with the upper world, the above world. It has birds, possibly pileated woodpeckers, which is a very important symbol to Mississippians. Woodpeckers can draw spirits out with their long beaks. This may represent day. This may represent night. This represents roots going into the underworld. That connection can provide a way to kind of mediate between those two worlds. And people use wooden poles to represent that world tree that would make a connection. It's almost like, I don't know, I think of it like a ground wire. You know, with the electricity, you have to ground it, otherwise it can do bad stuff, right? Obviously, I'm not a physicist. Electricity doing bad stuff. But at any rate, so this is one of the henge posts. It's been replaced at Cahokia in the wood henge. These cedar tree trunks, cedar being a kind of a reddish wood, it's the most special wood. So that tree metaphor is something that does mediate, or might be able to mediate, the tensions between the above world and the below world. But oftentimes, what we might be seeing, this is another shell engraving, very complicated with lots of different things going on. So here we have snakes. We have our quartered circles. And we have something odd tied around the snakes with a long tail coming out one end. A striped tail. A raccoon. You're thinking, raccoons, what? Why raccoons? Raccoons seem to have an ability to kind of go against some of these scary things that might be in the world. They're really good at hiding, at stealing. Ever had your Thanksgiving turkey carcass stolen by a raccoon? I did. Put it on the screen porch. Big mistake.
Had to do something with it.
You gotta do something with it. Raccoons also, they stand up like people. They wear disguises, right? Raccoons are waka. So next time you see a raccoon, go shoo, shoo. Or you're in the state park and you consider that because it's legal, you can shoot at it with a handgun. I think that's my favorite Indiana law, actually. Never tried it, but I mean, what state has a law that you can shoot a raccoon? Only a raccoon in the state park. Fascinating. Why? Because raccoons are waka. We call them varmints. But I love these raccoons. It's just like, oh great, you're going to mediate the snake monster with a raccoon. Will it work? I don't know. But you mentioned prayers, yes. Ceremonies keep the system sort of at equilibrium. You attach your raccoons, you pay homage to the world tree.
The four corners.
You got the four corners. This is a gorget, an object, a gorget that would have been worn on the chest, also made out of shell. It has two individuals. The pole is between them. Oftentimes they're facing the pole. This time they're facing away. I don't know what that means. Raccoon. This raccoon is interesting because he's wearing a symbol that sometimes means portal to the underworld or to the below world. And then each of these guys has raccoons. They each have 3 raccoons. Raccoon head, raccoon tail, hanging off from their belts. So they're wrapped in raccoons. And they also have, these actually are representing arrows. The actual meaning of anything and everything in this gorget, I don't know. Can't know for sure, but some of the indicators are kind of there. The ceremonies that keep people safe, that keep things going. One of them, very common in the, from the southeast through the Great Plains, probably originated in the southeast, a green corn ceremony, a renewal ceremony. The ceremonies consist of dancing and feasting and portrayals, perhaps, of some of the special beings, to make sure that every year things go on like they did the year before. Another ceremony, very common in the Mississippi area and to the west, is something called the Calumet ceremony, which involves a long like a staff, but the staff can be a pipe, or it can be something that looks like an arrow. This sort of arrow thing in here could be a kind of a precursor to the Calumet object. Things that pierce, like a woodpecker beak or an arrow. It allows you to enter something and perhaps pull something out. In other words, you can use it to dispel something that's dangerous because it's got too much waka. Calumet ceremony, used in historic times, and almost certainly before, as an adoption, as a way to create kin where you don't have kin. It's also something that you can do. You could adopt someone and give them some of the spirit of someone who is gone. So it's a way to keep people alive. It's almost like a reincarnation. One of the places that seems to have almost all of the elements of Southeast ceremonialism, Mississippi Valley ceremonialism, and ceremonialism also from the plains is that Spyro Site in Oklahoma. In that site, and now I'm going to turn away from this, I'm just going to tell a story. The Spyro Site is sitting on a high bluff terrace above the Arkansas River. It's in eastern Oklahoma. Anybody from or been to eastern Oklahoma?
Been there.
Been there. This is how the mound looked in the 1930s after a group of guys dug into it. This mound was on the property of an old woman, Mother May Brown, I think was her name. Or maybe it was Aunt May Brown, because she had a niece and a nephew. She was an elderly African-American woman. She'd had the farm for her and her family had had this farm for generations. She would not let anyone go near this mound because she said that it was waka. She said it was too special. It was dangerous. And she told stories that she had seen cats, black cats, going around the mound at night, pulling a little wagon. Either she had been perhaps tippling a bit, or she's evoking some sense of the scary panthers that could come out of the ground.
Do you know how long, if they tested, how long it dated back?
It dates back to the early levels of it. Date probably back to about probably between 7 and 900 AD or so. It was used as a burial mound. And then in the 15th century, something very special happened here. Something that maybe Aunt Brown didn't really know about, but she had some sense that this place was important. Well, it was the 1930s. It was eastern Oklahoma. What are you going to do to put food on the table? It's the Depression. No one has a job. So 6 guys who had been out of work miners called themselves the Bacola Mining Company. And as soon as Aunt May Brown died, she left her land to 2 children. They had a guardian. The guardian gave these guys a lease to go and mine for artifacts. So those guys dug lots of holes, and then eventually they tunneled into this center. And they found what they called a tomb, like a King Tut tomb, in Oklahoma. This was the 30s. Everyone knew about King Tut by that time because that was found in the 20s. And out of that mound came all those shells, pearls, baskets, flat baskets with pearls in them, flat baskets with copper plates, with copper ornaments, with wood, with ceramics, with stone tools. Amazing stuff. And so the guys sold what they could to get whatever money they could get. And of course, in the case of all sort of mound looting and stuff like that, they didn't get very much, but the dealers they sold the stuff to went and got more for it. Some of this material then got spread all over the country. After this happened, the state took control, and a WPA crew came in, and they actually took down the entire remainder of this mound, the Craig Mound, the whole thing.
Of course.
Of course, because they thought, well, it's already damaged, and we don't have people who don't have work, so let's do archaeology, because we don't know about these people. They should have listened to Aunt Brown, who said, get off of my mound, or those water panthers are going to come and take you away, who knows. But yes, they excavated that mound. All of the artifacts that came out of that are at a museum in Oklahoma from the WPA work, but there's material all from that mound from all over, including hundreds of the engraved shell cups that tell all those stories. The people who excavated, who dug into it, said there was an empty chamber inside, like it was a tomb. Archaeologists thought, how would that be even possible? I mean, there's no real evidence for mounds being constructed in a way where you would get an empty chamber in the middle. The mounds here don't have empty chambers in the middle. But it just so happened that when this was formed, there were burials and such in them, but at one specific time, someone very important, or somebody's very important, needed to be buried, and there was a grave made. In that grave, many people buried on large, like litters with poles. The poles, cedar poles, and then the litters had basketry, mats and stuff on them, and the people were laying on those, and the shells were piled against them, and the pearls were placed on them, and they were placed in this deposit, which we refer to it as the Great Mortuary.
Is that called a beer? B-I-E-R?
It was like a beer, yes, like a beer, but you would be able to pick it up and move it. So imagine a procession of people carrying these litters that have a frame of cedar poles, like if you were looking at a Roman being carried, a rich Roman being carried through the streets of ancient Rome. And the person is laying on that, and they're being carried, and they're being placed in this prepared surface with big stone pipes. The biggest deposit of the engraved shell of any site. And it also looks like they were also buried with the remains of people who had been buried elsewhere previously. So, burials that also included other ancestors who had been brought together, put together, and buried together. When they built that, when they made that floor, they sunk cedar poles in. The cedar poles were, think of this in cross-section, and there's actually an understructure of cedar poles that go through the mound. What that did was create an air chamber. Over the top of that was clay. They placed clay, which is pretty impervious. The water didn't really seep through. It settled, but yes, there probably was a chamber in there, even when these guys tunneled in. Those poles connected the below world with the above world. You could use those poles to communicate with the dead who were buried in the mound. It's like a conduit. It's the connection. From this mound here, from that deposit, because of the special way it was built, the preservation was amazing. Unfortunately, the people who were digging it were just guys, and they didn't see. So inside there, textiles, clothing, blankets made of rabbit hair, and dog hair, and vegetable fibers. And imagine taking the feathers off turkeys and pulling off the feathered part, leaving the quill behind, and then taking that feather stuff and wrapping it around a cord, and then weaving with that. You make something that looks like velvet. And they were dyed red and yellow and black and white, the most prevalent colors, the sacred colors, the colors that mean something. The guys who were in there, they just threw the stuff out. But there was a guy who lived in Lawrence, Kansas. He was a collector. He came and he made a statement that it was like the most horrible thing he had ever seen, because the bones of the people were just thrown out in the field around, as were some of these sort of lumpy, gooey things that turned out to be clothing, apparel. He collected some of those, and he eventually gave his collection to the Smithsonian, and those are preserved now. $1450, probably. 1400 to 1450 AD, but around 1450. So your question about, has this been dated? The Great Mortuary, about 1450 AD. It's probably one of the worst stories of looting in the US. And then there was the more unfortunate excavation technique, which was systematic, but was systematically destructive. Excavation's destructive.
Yes, it is.
I'm an archaeologist. It's destructive.
They did it here.
I know.
Yeah. Don't ask.
It's destructive. If you're going to do excavation, have a really good reason and let people know and see what other people want to learn. Like maybe the descendants.
What's upsetting to me is the stuff isn't kept on site. You know, we have really good people who work here.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff isn't kept on site.
Take it to Bloomington.
Yeah.
So if you're going to excavate, you should keep things on site. Things should, if you're going to document it, take things out, put it where people can see it, not in some locked room somewhere.
Good point. That's a good point.
Otherwise, just leave it where it was meant to be.
That's a
because
good point.
who in here has a relative buried in the ground, including me, that wants anybody to ever go dig them up?
There's a company in Illinois that solved that issue. They make diamonds out of your ashes after you're cremated. They only need 8 ounces and they can do them in several different colors.
Well, now I know where I want to go.
Well, you know, I mean, that's what we're talking
Yeah.
about here.
Well, but you have
That is
different.
the whole sum total of what we're talking about
Mhm.
here, and you being nice enough to come in here and explain all this to us, you know, it's continuation.
Yeah, I mean, when you die, you don't just die, no matter what you believe.
Do you think that could be the reason why they put the poles that came up out of the ground?
I
Is
think
they
that.
think the spirit could come and go as they please?
I think that maybe the spirit could come and go as they please. In other cases, with some of the plains groups that I've been reading about, they'll take a part of the like hair or something, and they'll say that the spirit goes into the hair, and they keep the hair. But then they think the spirit is away from the other bones. But it's okay because they still have the spirit in the hair. So there's a lot of variation in the way people think about it. Some people think that you need the bones there so the spirit can come and go. Maybe. Certainly the ancient Egyptians mummified so that they could keep the bones in really good shape, the bodies in really good shape, so that when the spirit came back, there was something for it to go into.
I hadn't seen that, so that was very interesting to see that. And that's why I asked how far back it dated, because, and you said it was a black woman. Well, in the march, there was a lot of black people who were Cherokee and stuff. And since the Cherokees are all descendants of the mound builders, I possibly thought that maybe they had somehow continued to bury their people traditionally.
Yeah, she may have been part Cherokee. I don't know. Certainly one of the workers, one of the miners who did the looting was an African-American man with a full Cherokee wife. So actually, the only people who took stuff out of there, probably the one with the best claim would have been him and his wife, because they actually had perhaps some connection.
And if they followed their religion, they would have known they had the claim.
But they were just, they were just trying to get food, something to get food on the table,
Yeah.
which is,
Understandable.
Yeah.
To a certain degree.
yeah. You bring up really good points, and with archaeology now, half of what we talk about and half of what we write about is ethics. Because you realize it's destructive research. You could do a lot of research without destroying anything. And there is the point about the fact that there is a lot of material out of angel mounds from the WPA excavations and others that are in Bloomington. I would welcome anybody to come. They're at the Glenn Black Laboratory, which I now direct.
Can you
And
stay at your place?
you stay at my place. You'd have to put up with a really grungy husband, 2 evil cats, and a grumpy sister. But yeah, okay. So the plans are, I'd like to know more about what people would like to see. What would you like to see at the Glenn Black? We have a gallery. It's empty now. It wants to have something for people to interact with.
The artifacts and things that have come from different mounds, so some people can see.
Can see. We can do that.
A lot of companies have closed down in this area in the past several years. People don't have the money to go to Bloomington or You know, I mean, it's not
Right.
that far, but at the same time, if you're gonna make a decent visit, then you are going to be there for, you know, a little while anyway.
Good point. That's a
Yeah,
good
and
point.
It's like all the people, that Angel Mounds is in the city. It's close by, but there's nothing here. It was all taken out. So people who don't have the money
Mm-hmm.
can't get the blooming.
Maybe some exhibits that are, you could travel.
We can make traveling exhibits, sure. And we can make exhibits that we can do 3D imaging now. And have stuff available on the internet so that you can look at a pot and turn it around and see what it looks like.
We've also thought about scheduling a bus tour to the Bloomington, to the lab.
That would be awesome.
That would be awesome.
How much would that
Like
cost?
200 people in the lab at one time.
That would be great.
Well, we're having an open house at the lab in just a couple of weeks on the 28th on Friday afternoon from 4 to 6.
Well,
But
that depends on what kind of winter we're gonna have.
yeah, well, exactly.
Weather.
So we're going to have an open house then. But we're also going to do a lot of new things. The old exhibit that we had was taken down. We now have issues with like a leaky roof on the lab over the exhibit. So I'm not putting anybody's ancestors' things in a leaky place. Just doesn't seem fitting.
Well, this building has pretty good structure for here.
Oh, it's really a lot. It's really, really a lot.
I would like to see the mounds in different places preserved, and just, even if they built just, like down at the Trail of Tears in Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have some chiefs buried there. They built just a little bitty log cabin, and you can just go in and look at some of the things they found there and a little bit about the culture. And it's a shame those types of things can't be built adjacent to other mounds and places that people held sacred and holy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wouldn't think that it would take too much to run that down in Hopkinsville. So, and we have a nice building and everything here. We just don't have the displays that we need from what has come, you know, been found from here. And I know some of that is security issue as well.
Yeah, there are serious security issues.
Yeah. But
Yes.
the gentleman that runs the place lives next door, and my nephew works there now.
Question?
Just a tremendous discovery that Black discovered all this and was backed by Eli Lilly, I believe. But I'm 62 and I'm just, you know, I've gotten into this recently, but I'm ashamed that, you know, I grew up here, I'm a native, and I knew very little about it. I came out here and dug in Angel Mounds as a kid, and they said it was very important. But, I mean, Dr. Bertel's here, but I think it's, you know, our school children, not just in Evansville and in Newburgh, but probably all of Indiana. This is a tremendous discovery of Mississippian culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're in charge of the Black place, you know, that I think somehow to get the word out to a younger generation, because this covers 1000 AD to 1500 AD,
Mm-hmm.
and all we learn about in our schools is Columbus on. And I mean, now we're learning more, but I really
Yeah.
think that period of time is so important in the mystical part of this, and the relationship with Egypt, you know, those types of symbolism in life and afterlife. But I don't know how to get it more into school systems, and I don't know how many tours we have here, but I'm sure it's just like our LST and many other things that we don't get enough tours. There's complications with tours, there's problems with buses, problems with costs, problem with all kinds of things, but I'm sure you see that in Bloomington. But I mean, you're in charge.
Well, we've been thinking about ways to produce curriculum materials and kits that can travel, and I mean, maybe even to the extent of being able to make 3D prints of artifacts that can go into kits, so that kids can handle something that is the right shape, but perhaps it's not the original, but it's something that you can learn from.
Your idea just a minute ago about a 3D website, it'd be nice if you could build that